Do you ever feel like an argument just goes in circles, or worse, turns into a full-blown disaster? You're not alone. But what if Brittany and I told you that just a few simple changes could completely transform the way you handle conflict? There are actually 4 steps to conflict resolution, and they're simple, but they're not always easy. But stick with us, because these 4 steps will change the game. So Brittany, why don't you talk about step 1?
The first step is to forgive. You know how in the Bible it says, if you forgive others of their sins, your Heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you cannot forgive others, then our Heavenly Father won't forgive us.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. What does that really mean? I know of a story, there are these revival meetings going on where a man actually was so convicted, so moved by the preacher, that he confessed to molesting a young girl. He actually turned himself into the police and accepted the consequences of his actions. But he did more than that. He went to the parents and he begged them for forgiveness. Now, the parents, they turned out to be Christians, and they forgave this man of his sin against their daughter. Now, he was truly repentant, and when he did serve his time in prison, he reached out to as many inmates as possible while he was there. He just wanted everyone to know about God's forgiveness and his transforming power.
So yeah, I know this story. Years later, that young girl turned out to be happy, normal, secure, and loving woman. And because her parents did not harbor any of that resentment and chose to forgive, she found complete emotional healing. So it just goes to show the transforming and healing power of forgiveness. At the end of this video, we have a whole episode on forgiveness, which is crucial for every relationship.
So I'll talk about step number 2. Get the log out of your own eye before you get the speck out of your brother's eye. In other words, we need to confess our own contribution to the conflict, because a conflict is never just one person. It's always both parties.
Well, there's another true story I can remember. I'll change the names of the characters. So Julia and Jake were in a long-term relationship. Julia had always emphasized the importance of trust and honesty in the relationship. And she would tell everyone that open, honest communication was important to her. That was the foundation of love. But then she would often check his phone and ask where he was, and would get upset if he didn't immediately respond to her messages and things.
But Jake, on the other hand, he was very loyal and faithful, and he would put up with her being demanding because he loved her. And I remember this story too. One day he found out that she was actually texting some other guy, flirting with him online and behind his back. Mm-hmm. So she had this double standard. She's telling him, you have to be completely open and honest with me, and yet she was doing the exact opposite with him. So here she has a log in her own eye, mm-hmm. and she's accusing him. That's another topic where you project your own behavior on someone else.
Right.
So Jake ended up breaking up with her because of her hypocrisy. He couldn't trust her anymore. He realized that trust is not a one-way street. It's a two-way street. Always, it must be. Have you ever seen this kind of hypocrisy? If you have, comment below. But please don't use people's real names. We want to respect people's privacy. And yeah, you might want to reveal who it is because you just want to get back at them or something, but please don't do that. So Brittany, why don't you tell us about the third step?
So the next point is actually the most challenging, and that is to gently remove the speck from your brother's eye. This is helping the other person see how they contributed to the conflict. So in the Bible, it says, "Brethren, if a man is overtaken in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness." So the key here is to be gentle and kind about it. And so that's where we can get a little in our feelings, and we kind of want to just have revenge. We don't want to think things through. That includes asking questions, listening carefully with the purpose of actually understanding. You have to be intentional about hearing what they're saying.
Tell me if I'm wrong, but I think guys tend to have a problem with this.
I won't disagree with that.
I know a lot of guys, including myself, will just be waiting for the person to finish talking so that we can say what we want to say, and we're barely even listening to the other person.
Yeah, but I don't think that's just a man issue. I think it's just a people issue. Like, we have to be more intentional about active listening and being intentional about hearing what the other person is saying.
Okay, now I know you're really good at active listening, so let's unpack that a little bit. Because I know one tip that I was told a long time ago on active listening is repeat back to them what they said. Because then that makes you actively listen, and it shows a person that you're actively listening to them.
Like paraphrasing what the person says.
Paraphrasing what the other person said.
Yeah. That wasn't paraphrasing, that was repeating.
Okay, so this is so short.
Well.
Okay, so don't parrot them, but you want to paraphrase. Okay, so the whole point of active listening is to see things through the other person's viewpoint, because the context of what we're talking about is conflict resolution. You have to learn to see through the other person's view to see where they're coming from, so that you can, if you have to, you can correct them if they're wrong.
It's kind of that old saying, put yourself in the other person's shoes. You know, like everybody has a different perspective. Hear the other person out, especially if you're resolving something like conflict, then you need to be mindful that you're both going to have different perspectives of what's happening. Yeah, so there's another example of this. So it's Michelle and Jacqueline, but they somehow brought up a pastor's wife in conversation. So Jacqueline immediately pipes up and says she had an abortion. And Michelle replied, "Oh, how do you know this?" And so I guess these girls are talking and gossiping is what's happening. And upon questioning Jacqueline, Michelle actually discovered that, one, Jacqueline didn't hear it from the pastor's wife directly. She heard it from somebody else, that the pastor's wife had been at an abortion clinic or something like that. And so she was assuming she must have had an abortion. But the truth is, pastor's wife was not having an abortion. They had a planned pregnancy, which ended up in a miscarriage, unfortunately. And so she was at that facility to get help with the miscarriage. So it wasn't an abortion, it was a miscarriage.
Speaking of jumping to conclusions, we have a video on jumping to conclusions. So removing the speck from someone else involves asking questions to get to the bottom of it, getting to the truth, and also correcting the person gently, kindly, if necessary.
Yeah.
So the Bible doesn't say that we shouldn't correct each other. It says that you got to correct yourself first, and then you can correct other people. So our last point is go and be reconciled. In Matthew 5, therefore, if you bring your gift to the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go your way. First be reconciled to your brother, then come and offer your gift. This reminds me of an elderly woman who kept on getting up during the song service at church. Pastor noticed every time the praise team would start singing, she would get up and leave. And other church members also started protesting the music. They would see her get up and leave, and they would also get up and leave during the song service. They didn't like the music. They thought it was inappropriate. It wasn't holy enough. And so this started polarizing the church. So the pastor went to this elderly lady one day, decided to go and be reconciled. We need to fix this conflict in the church. And when he questioned her, it turns out she had no issues with the music at all. She had bladder problems, and she had to go to the bathroom frequently. It had nothing to do with music. It was a whole big misunderstanding, but everyone thought that she was leaving in protest to the music, and they joined her. Okay, so why don't you tell us a little bit about where this idea comes from, that this pastor, he went and spoke to the elderly woman privately before talking to anyone else?
Yeah, so Jesus gives advice in Matthew 18. If we have a problem with someone, we don't talk to anyone else. We don't spread rumors and a bunch of gossip. We go to that person about it. We need to do our best to make peace with that person. Talk only to that person about that, whatever that issue is.
So the key here in Matthew 18 is that you got to do a one-on-one. You don't go talk to the elders. You don't go talk to your sister or brother or parents. Like you got to talk to that person one-on-one.
Sometimes there is conflict that ends up not being able to be resolved. And so what do we do in that case? Then bring that third party in to help mediate.
This is particularly important in relationships. You hear too many times where a man is disgruntled with his spouse and gossips to his friends about it.
Right.
Or even worse, he goes and unloads his cares upon another woman, talks to her about it. That's even worse. I hear all ladies doing this too. They talk to all their girlfriends about all the bad things that their husband is doing. But if we follow the advice of Matthew 18, you've got to work things out just one-on-one. And like you said, if you can't, then you go to a third party. And they've got to be a wise third party to go to. For example, a counselor or a pastor.
I mean, I already had issues. I didn't have a good perception of marriage. I didn't have a healthy image of what marriage looked like really until later in life. And then I would still hear the juicy gossip and the things that he's doing bad. And so you're just going to look like the worst husband in the world by the time you get done with 5 or 10 years worth of gossiping at your workplace about your husband. Like, wow, you married the worst husband in the world.
Yeah, when are you going to leave him? Now, here's a bonus tip. Is don't use text or email to resolve conflicts. I've seen conflicts just get worse. Sometimes you could be as nice as possible in email or text, but the person hears it differently because they're just reading words.
You can't see facial expressions. You can't hear tone of voice, any of that through text or email.
Right.
So it's whatever your own self is perceiving it to be. That's what it's going to sound like. And you're like, I've done that plenty of times. Oh, this person's mad at me because they didn't put a smiley face at the end or something. It's like, oh.
So it's got to be in person or by phone if you have to, because at least you can hear their voice. So let's review these 4 steps. Number 1, forgive. The key here is it simply takes your decision, and you might have to make that decision every day to forgive someone before you find complete healing, but it can be done. Step number 2 is admit your contribution to the conflict. So get the log out of your own eye because you're not perfect. Step number 3 is help the other person see how they contributed to the conflict. This is the time after you've gotten the log out of your own eye, you can gently correct someone else, take the speck out of their eye for what they've done. And finally, number 4 is be reconciled. So that means you've got to talk one-on-one with a person. Don't go gossiping to other people about this person. Go talk to them one-on-one. Don't do it through email. Don't do it through text. Talk to them. And if you have to, then you get a third party.
So which tip resonated with you guys the most? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. If you guys found this video helpful, share it with someone you care about and subscribe for more life-changing advice.
And join us for our next video on forgiveness. See you there.